Hello, everyone. Welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. My name is Alex Tokely. I'm in São Paulo as usual, and it is Thursday, the 15th of February. The episode that came out last week, you'll have heard that we spoke to Vedi Hadiz about Indonesia's history, its social formation, and look forward to the election, which just happened yesterday. So now this is going to be the second episode we do on Indonesia and its elections. You might ask yourself why, but as the title of this episode has it, and the previous one too, it's the biggest country that no one actually really talks about. It's the world's fourth largest country by population. It's in the top 10 economies by purchasing power parity. And then yesterday, Indonesia went to the polls on the 14th of February, and this is the world's third largest democracy. And it stages what is, I think, the world's biggest single day general election. And it's also a very young country. Young people made up the majority of voters, 55% of them aged between 17 and 40. Okay, so who was the winner? Well, as you heard on last week's podcast, it was already pretty clear what the outcome would be. Was Prabowo Subianto. Excuse me for the pronunciation. So what's been the response to this? I think it's kind of interesting. Winter is coming, exclaimed The Guardian in response. Never want to miss an opportunity for some cheap pop culture reference, which is completely irrelevant to the place, but whatever, there we go. CNN said, ex-army strongman leader claims victory. The BBC said, what can Indonesia expect from its new strongman leader? So it's kind of a clear theme there. And as one kind of popular tweet had it, as expected, Prabowo is winning. Welcome to Indonesia's dark age. Oh, and fuck Jokowi. That there's a lot of stuff to be explained there. And I'm very happy to have someone who will be able to explain to us in depth what exactly is going on in Indonesia and place it in its historical context. Indeed, a country which seems to be keen on erasing its own historical context. But we're going to come on to that. Michael Vann, delighted to have you. For those of you who don't know him, he's a professor of history at Sacramento State University and the author of The Great Hanoi Rat Hunt, Empire, Disease, and Modernity in French Colonial Vietnam, and that came out back in 2019. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I've been a fan of you guys for a while, and also got to have you guys on the New Books Network a few years
Yeah.
ago, and that was a fun chat.
No, it's very belated return invite, I think here. So like to get stuck into it, and well, you mentioned you were doing some like grieving drinking, or I'm not sure exactly what you called it in response to Indonesia's election results. So let's start with the emotional aspect. What prompted that?
Yeah, I was self-medicating some emotional trauma at the election results. Those of us who are Indonesia watchers and Indonesia lovers, I mean, most Indonesians are just totally captivated by the place for all the cliche reasons, which we won't go into. But there's a fantastic list of things
Well, no,
never
go into
that
the cliche
journalists should never.
reason. Sorry,
Well,
I think it's
it's
worth it because
stunningly
people don't aren't
gorgeous.
familiar
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's stunningly gorgeous, and by the way, you guys nailed it with the title of the last episode. It is the largest country in the world that nobody talks about, and as someone who's been working on Indonesia since I was an undergraduate, actually, and it was my discovery of Indonesia is why I became a historian and wanted to become a historian in high school because
Mm.
it's an incredible place. I mean, so all the cliches about just the incredible beauty in the of natural beauty of the place, the incredible cultural diversity, well over 350 different languages, not dialects, but languages. Everyone speaks Bahasa Indonesia as a lingua franca, but that's for most people not a language that they speak at home. They speak Javanese or Bahasa Madura or Balinese or what have you. Um, the natural beauty, the diversity of culture, the fascinating history. I mean, that's what got me into it. Was actually as a high schooler seeing the Year of Living Dangerously, and as a 16-year-old, I'm like, what is this place? I want to learn more about this.
Mm.
Um, so there's just so many draws, and it's just incredible. But there's also these great cliches that we're not supposed to talk about, like the Year of Living Dangerously, and never mention shadow puppets as a metaphor. Don't mention volcanoes, and journalists always have these stock phrases. Like you'll always see, they'll reference, say, Prabowo, the president elect, and they'll journalists will say, well, many Indonesians go by one name, and which is quite common. But anyway, it's it's just, I think, one of the most fascinating places, and also so politically important over the course of the 20th century, and economically important throughout several centuries of history. I would argue the origins of capitalism lie in the Dutch East India Company and the spice trade, and that's what the Dutch were trying to get to, those spices, and that created the need for stock exchanges and all the financial mechanisms that we know today. So anyway, I'm a big promoter of Indonesia and the study thereof.
No, great. I mean, I think it's worth, yeah, as I say, it's worth underlining that just because it does get kind of strangely brushed aside in kind of global pictures of everywhere, right? And many smaller countries have a much larger, more important profile than Indonesia does. So I've always been curious as to why that is, and kind of taken a while to get around to actually doing an episode or several episodes on the country. But anyway,
Yeah,
figured we'd
yeah.
take the
Well,
opportunity.
I think part of that may also be they weren't colonized by the right country to get on the map. You know, the Netherlands doesn't quite have the same footprint in the academy. Many of
Mm,
for historians, the archives are going to be in Dutch, and so much post-colonial research follows the old colonial flags. You have to learn French to do
yeah,
Vietnamese
yeah.
history or a good chunk of Africa, and so that's kind of marginalized. There has not been a major Indonesian diaspora, as with, say, the Philippines or Vietnam, what have you. Um, and also, I think that, and something I think we're going to talk about, I think that the Suharto regime was very good at sort of pulling Indonesia away from the spotlight after it had been in the spotlight
Mm.
under the nationalist president and populist president Sukarno.
Oh yeah. I want to kind of start by the most recent events. So start with the election itself. So Prabowo, as you pointed out to me, that he's ran in 2014 and 2019 again, and in those campaign videos, he comes off as, well, a military authoritarian as he is, and in his most recent kind of campaign videos and the persona he's tried to bring to the campaign, he's like this kind of cuddly, maybe a bit populist grandpa. So, how has he affected this, and who is he really?
Yeah, this is one of the more amazing um, political reinventions of a candidate. I mean, so I was looking at old campaign footage from 2014, and he's literally a man on horseback. I mean, he was a decorated officer, and looking at some younger photos of him, I mean, was fit the part. I mean, he's now sort of chunky as many of us get as we get older. But he was, like, sort of like Donald Trump's vision of what a general should look like. This strong, powerful guy, and
Right.
and so in these campaigns in 2014, and I think he brought the horses back in 2019. But he's literally a man on horseback with some sort of fascist looking imagery. And there was even a campaign video that came out in 2014 that is just absolutely appalling. And I urge all the listeners to Google it, Prabowo 2014 campaign video, where they had a handful of Indonesian pop stars singing to the music from We Will Rock You, but singing Prabowo Hatta, his name and his vice presidential running mate's name, and it is Nazi imagery. One of the pop stars has an SS style uniform on, and so that's the guy that we have been thinking of in terms of Prabowo for decades now. And this is in his 21st century career, right? I mean, his 20th century career involves an extensive military resume, which we can talk about. And now this reinvention for this campaign, and it started about a year ago, and he is presented literally as this cuddly grandpa. The Indonesians are using the slang word gamoy for, it literally means cuddly, like I think the connotations are like, it's so cute, you just want to squeeze his little cheeks, right? And he's been appearing not on horseback, but at these rallies that are like music parties with like dangdut, which is this dangdut's this like popular um, kind of folk pop music. It's a little risque. It's got some Indian Ocean rhythms. I don't know quite how to describe it, but he'd be dancing and dancing in a really weird, awkward manner. Uh, not as awkward as Donald Trump's dance, where he's doing the things with the ghosts in his hands, but this sort of old grandpa dance, where he's like kind of doing like Javanese kind of like folk dance moves, and not in uniform, in a casual shirt, and real man of the people. And this took off on Instagram and especially TikTok, and won over this like key voting demographic that you mentioned. The stats on how many Indonesian voters are below 30 years of age, and he won them over. And it's mind blowing. I think that folks of my generation, I'm in my mid 50s, and um, uh, who remember the 20th century, and so folks in their 50s and 40s are much more nervous about this guy because they remember previous elections. And now he's this cuddly grandpa, and then he lost to the current president Jokowi twice when they were both running for president in 2014 and then again in 2019. And when he lost in 2019, he refused to concede, and he had his thugs, Premon. Um, Premon is a gangster. If you've seen The Act of Killing, the incredible Josh and Oppenheimer film, it's the Premons are the guys that go out and do the killing, and he profiles the Premon, who are these like they're racketeers who have political links in Indonesian society. Anyway, he unleashed Premons in the capital, and there were deadly riots for a couple of days. But now we've got this cuddly guy that is and then and the image they're using is again not Prabowo on horseback, but AI generated cartoons of him looking like just looking so gamoy. You just want to pinch his little cheeks.
I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, even just you read the basic biography and his implication in kidnappings and of pro-democracy demonstrators at the end of the 90s and things like this. I mean, I find it especially shocking because, I mean, I'm looking at this from perspective from Brazil, where there was also military dictatorship over a similar sort of period where there was the military back in power, either directly or as it was, through Bolsonaro, kind of indirectly, but getting a lot of military people in government and in the kind of civilian arms of the state. But no one would have been into them for being cuddly. Like that would have been several steps too far in terms of trying to re-ennoble the image of the Brazilian military. So I find it quite shocking. But I also have this, the images that I have of Indonesia are also like things like from the act of killing, which is to say quite very limited. But you have those images of like the Pancasila youth of, kind of a paramilitary youth group, which are like 3 million strong or something like that. And with imagery, which is like very, it's not the kind of, old stand up kind of military kind of honor or whatever. Like that's not the image that is conveyed. It's much more aggressive, sort of fascistic image that's conveyed. And so I don't know enough about Indonesia to really cast too much judgment on it. But looking at it from afar and just looking at a few kind of images, it's like, wow, this is something which is very normalized, it seems.
The fascist aesthetic is incredibly normalized, and that campaign ad using the Nazi imagery didn't raise too many eyebrows in Indonesia. It was internationally where people were appalled. And I've got a slide in one of my lectures that I give on Indonesian history, talking about recent politics. And it's a picture I took when I was working at a university in Central Java in Yogyakarta at Universitas Gadjah Mada. And it's a vendor in front of the Sultan's palace, and he's selling posters. There's a bunch of posters on the side there, and you've got the Beatles, and you've got One Direction, and then you got a poster of Sukarno, the first president of Indonesia and nationalist hero, and then you got a poster of Adolf Hitler, and then you got a poster of the Beatles. And you
Right.
could go down and is it One Direction or Hitler? I don't know what I'm going to get today. Okay, I'll get the Hitler, um, and very little understanding of the history, but the image of strong man in uniform, commanding presence, and the knowledge that Hitler was a strong leader, has it has this circulation that is wild to people who are from other cultures that may have um, a different historical memory of that era. You see this fascist imagery in all sorts of places in Indonesia. Um,
Mm.
and
So
at the
I
same
want to dig.
time, and that runs counter to um, sort of the what is generally a very refined and polite uh, popular culture. The Indonesians use the word halus, and halus is sort of aristocratic, kind, gentle, welcoming. It's a Javanese value, and
Mm,
really contrasts that with kasar. And kasar is like sort of gruff, popular, and politicians, Indonesian politicians, are always very, very halus and very sort of gentle and very diplomatic. But at the same time, there's this fascination with these figures of power, totally out of historical context, totally out of historical
right.
context. And even,
But who are just convey strength and
yeah,
power and yeah.
yeah, and even so even Sukarno, the left of center, very Communist Party friendly first president of Indonesia, um, who had an ideology of Nasacom, nationalism, communism, and Islam. He was going to get those three together, and that was his state ideology. He adopted all sorts of fascist imagery. And there's a great anecdote in one of Benedict Anderson's works where he talks about being a translator at a cocktail party for diplomats in the 1960s. And Sukarno was saying, it's good to be a nationalist. Look what Hitler did for Germany. He went in there and found all these Germans who felt really sad, and he made them feel good about themselves. And so I want to do that. And Anderson's translating that for these diplomats, and they're just appalled at what this guy is saying. This is like
Right.
62, 63, maybe 64. And then the famous book, novel, and film title that we're not supposed to Indonesians aren't supposed to reference because it's such a cliche of the year of living dangerously. This was a speech Sukarno gave the year before he was overthrown, and saying the Indonesian people, we're going to live dangerously, and we're going to, it's sort of like Mao with, bomb the bureaucratic ramparts kind of thing. That's lifted from Mussolini. He plagiarized Mussolini and Italian fascism on that year of living dangerously idea. So there's this current there that is across Indonesian politics, and so it's what makes this reinvention of Prabowo, who would be the epitome of that strongman. I mean, again, look at the old campaign photos with him on horseback. The invention of him as cuddly grandpa, um, stroke of genius. But I don't know. Hey, I'm not in his inner circle. Maybe he's gotten more good loyal age. Maybe it's sincere. Maybe I'm just being paranoid here because
Well,
most
I mean, I do want to
Indonesians are
ask
very
you.
concerned. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do want to ask you whether this is, aesthetic, cultural, or if there is some kind of deeper, truer political reality that these images speak to. But before we get on to that, because we'll do that in just a little bit, I did wanted to ask what his, what his rule will be like. I'm just having a look a little bit at what some foreign press said. So the Financial Times suggested there might be concerns about populism, but by that they just mean some costly campaign pledges. Also, possibly his nationalism might put off Chinese investors. The Foreign Affairs said that Indonesia's democracy is stronger than a strong man, so Prabowo will find it difficult to rule as an authoritarian. Do you think those takes are correct? I mean, how do you see it, and also how strong is he in the legislature?
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, some of those takes are across the spectrum there, and also in the intro, you should throw the Guardian under the bus with the winter is coming reference.
Yes,
I
yes.
technically I think the Guardian was quoting Amnesty International Indonesia. So
Oh yeah, no, I'm
yeah,
no,
they were quoting somebody. Yeah,
they
but
were, but it's still really cringe. So I'm,
I know
and I won't
it's
miss an
cringe.
opportunity to kick the Guardian.
Fair enough, but it was a human rights organization. It was either Amnesty International or one of the local organizations. Well, we don't know, but his track record and his public statements over decades are openly hostile to democratic institutions. He in an interview a number of years ago with Alan Nairn, he said, "Yeah, maybe Indonesia needs fascism. Maybe I should be a fascist. Maybe that is something I'll embrace." And this was an interview about 10 years ago. Um, Based on his behavior in 2019, I think there's no reason to think that he's really modified too much. But this process of the president in Indonesia gaining more power and being more centralized has been going on in this last term under Jokowi. And Jokowi has done a number of things, making it much more easier to go after people criticizing the president or other elite politicians, restricting human rights. Jokowi went back on, he really stabbed uh, the KPK, the anti-corruption organization, in the back. He really sort of
Mm.
um, uh, emasculated it. It's lost a lot of its power. So I think, if Prabowo does start to centralize power, this isn't a huge rupture. I think this is continuing a trajectory that has been developing in Jokowi's second term, which for many of us who were, I'll admit, I was up until more recently than I'm comfortable admitting, I was still pretty optimistic about Jokowi being this reformer. Um, and this past 2 years have just been the opposite of that.
Well, so
One,
let's
yeah,
get on to him, because you called him Indonesia's Obama, and it's also worth noting that his son is now the vice president to Prabowo, right? So
right.
there's something going on there. I wonder what would be the U.S. equivalent of that? It'd be like one of Obama's kids, like running, being like Trump's VP or something.
Or Hunter Biden. Oh, maybe that's it. The Hunter Trump ticket. We could really do something in there.
Right, right. That would be cool. That'd be cool.
that would be that would be Society of the Spectacle right there. Um, yeah. Well, okay. So two things going on. What has been Jokowi's trajectory, and then what's up with this wild alliance that we've seen in this election between Jokowi and Prabowo. So, I mean, Jokowi, his background was that he was the first national politician who was not from this old guard elite. And all the other leading political figures come out of Suharto era politics and have connections to Suharto's New Order, this dictatorship of 32 years that only collapsed in 1998. And Jokowi came from, modest middle class background, a city in central Java. His family were furniture sellers. And he became the mayor of this town, Solo, also known as Surakarta, in central Java, and was a fairly popular mayor, and then ran for governor of Jakarta. And that's kind of a curious trajectory, because he's a local politician in central Java, and then he runs for the governor of the capital city, a couple hours away. But for in the past couple decades, the thinking was that being governor of Jakarta was a way to move on to the presidency. And he was a fairly effective governor of Jakarta, and he was famous for wearing flannel shirts and being a heavy metal fan, and sort of this uncorrupted man of the people. And he would do these on the spot visits, where he would just show up in an area where there were some social issues and just talk to the average people and just hear the average people. And it's great, it's great photo ops. And then he would, motion towards some sort of policy that would help them out. And he went on this incredible political trajectory from mayor of this town in central Java to governor of Jakarta. After one term there, he ran for president of Indonesia and won in 2014 against Prabowo, and it was a pretty bitter election. The 2019 election is even more bitter and even more polarizing. And Jokowi presents himself as not corrupted and not part of the old elite. And for much of his presidency, he was. I mean, this is he's really good on not having these corruption scandals up until these past couple of years. Most of his corruption, like the two big corruption scandals, were both Metallica based corruption, both heavy metal based corruption, where he received a guitar from that had been played by Metallica, and as a personal gift, and the corruption agencies wants to know you can't do that. That's a personal gift, and so he donated it to the people of Jakarta, and they put it into a special park, and that won him even more popularity. And then I think a Swedish diplomat gave him a box set of some very rare Metallica
Well,
albums,
wait,
and
wait,
which
wait till
ended
wait till
there.
Metallica find out that he hasn't been paying for their songs or albums. Then
Yeah, they'll
that'll
come
be a real
after.
scandal.
Well, he got on stage when they played. He got on
Right,
stage when
right.
they played, and there's a lot to be said about Indonesia heavy metal and politics. I was living in Central Java when Guns N' Roses played, and they came out to a totally uh, black stage with a spotlight on the guitarist who was playing Indonesia Raya, the Indonesian national anthem, and the audience just went crazy. And I didn't know this happened. The next day, I'm just going to the 7-Eleven, and everyone's stopping me like, "Yeah, America, Guns N' Roses, thank you so much." And like hearts and minds through heavy metal there. But and Jokowi was a heavy metal fan. Like his big boost came from this local metal band called Slank supporting him, which I recently was told it was kind of on a whim that they supported him, and that gave him this popular appeal. Anyway, Joey was this uncorruptible figure that was from the old order, and then had this really nasty election in 2019, where again Prabowo, you know, started riots. And he was doing a January 6th kind of thing before it was cool, right? And he Jokowi responded by bringing Prabowo into his administration and made him Minister of Defense, which has been a pattern in Indonesian politics. It's I don't know, a team of rivals kind of thing. But Jokowi had not done much of this in his first administration, but he did it. He did it in 2019, and that gave that created the opening for this rapprochement between these two. And over the course of this administration, the second administration of Jokowi, he and Prabowo have become closer and closer. And also, it's worth noting that when he made Prabowo Minister of Defense, Prabowo then was able to visit the United States for the first time in, I think, about 20 years. The U.S. had refused to give him a visa because of Prabowo's human rights record. But when he was Minister of Defense, the Trump administration said, well, we got to let this guy in. And that was his first visit to the U.S. in I think, 2020. Um,
All right, yeah.
he wasn't even allowed to see his son graduate from college in, I think, 2012 in Massachusetts. So, yeah, well, I call Jokowi the Indonesian Obama because there was so much optimism that this outsider would come in and really change things. And especially by the second administration, not much has changed. And indeed, he's increasingly bought into the existing power structure and also acting in a more and more authoritarian way. And so as he gets closer to Prabowo, his defense minister, um, and we start to move towards the election, it's clear that Prabowo is going to run again. And there's two other presidential candidates. One from Jokowi's party, who's a very nice but totally forgettable guy from Central Java, and then another politician, Anis. And Anis has another one of these very, very quick upward political trajectories, like Jokowi. He's American educated. One of my friends was his professor at Northern Illinois University. Very sharp study, political scientist, and he became governor of Jakarta. But he got to that position by attacking who had been Jokowi's second hand man, a Chinese Indonesian politician who goes by the name Ahok. And when Jokowi was Jokowi was governor of Jakarta, Ahok was his vice governor. And when Jokowi left to run for president and then become president, Ahok became the governor of Jakarta. And here we start to see some identity politics come in. And Anis used um, uh, uh, Muslim identity politics to just as a shorthand there. I know that's
Hmm.
we can unpack that for hours, right? I don't want everybody coming at me for that, but basically using Muslim identity politics to go after Ahok, who's ethnic Chinese and Christian, and it led to there was a cell phone video of Ahok giving a speech where he was saying something about it in Islamic, a verse from the Quran that he was just it wasn't anything that controversial, but that clip was edited in a really amateurish way. I've watched it a zillion times. I don't know how anybody could be convinced that it wasn't edited, and to make it look like he was engaging in blasphemy. And that led to this mobilization against Ahok. And Anis really rode that to power and beat Ahok in the election. And then Ahok was found guilty of blasphemy and spent a couple years in jail. And this is the
So
end of Ahok's political career.
that's a big transgression of norms. Then, like that would be something that which would just rule you out everywhere in Indonesian politics, or
Conviction of
primarily
blasphemy.
in Java, or huh? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was yeah, that was a bit of a career ender there, and spent a couple years in jail. And I think that the judge gave him more time in jail than the prosecutors were asking for, and it was really
Wow.
scandalous. And so Anis, this who's now governor of Jakarta, had been using that and continued to use these popular demonstrations in Jakarta. They were huge. I mean, just gigantic demonstrations on Friday after Friday prayers, and hundreds of thousands of people dressed in white, and these big demonstrations. And this was Jokowi's political ally that Anis took down, Ahok. And so uh, Jokowi definitely going to make sure that Anis doesn't come to power, because Anis is the three presidential candidates were Prabowo, Anis, and then Ganjar, the guy from Jokowi's party. And Jokowi decided he's going to put his thumb on the scale in favor of Prabowo. He turned his back
Yeah.
on the candidate from his own party, who they kind of shot themselves in. Jokowi's party kind of shot themselves in the foot. The power broker for that party is Megawati Sukarno Putri, who in Megawati is the daughter of President Sukarno. She briefly served as president, but has receded from electoral politics to be the power broker, right? And last year, she had Anis, or not Anis, but Gibran, come out and oppose Indonesia hosting, allowing the Israeli soccer team for the FIFA Under 20 League come to Indonesia. They said, no, we're not going to allow the Israeli team to come. And that backfired tremendously and led to Ganjar's approval in the polls tanking, because FIFA responded by saying, okay, you're not going to let a team come. We're not sending this
Mm.
tournament to Indonesia. And love of soccer was more important than fanning the flames of anti-Israel political sentiment.
Right. Well, hello, listener. I hope you like what you're hearing. It's a short excerpt from an episode that's available only to subscribers. Want to support BungaCast and get at least 2 original episodes a month? Sign up at patreon.com/BungaCast right now. $5 a month patrons get access to exclusive episodes like our in-depth analyses of present history. The big stuff that's happening right now. As well as chats with our regular guests, extended interviews with the key thinkers trying to understand our world today, and much more. For $10 a month, you join the BungaCast Reading Club, the place for those of us who are serious about equipping ourselves with the necessary intellectual tools for understanding the world and seeking to change it. Phil, George, and myself, Alex, look forward to seeing you there. Patreon.com/BungaCast.